On November 28, 1987, South African Airways Flight 295, a massive Boeing 747 called the Helderberg, just vanished into the Indian Ocean. What came next was one of the deepest salvage operations in history, and a mystery that, even today, is still officially unsolved. To really get what went wrong, we've got to start in the cockpit, during the final, terrifying moments of the flight.
So picture this. It's a routine flight from Taiwan to South Africa. Everything's normal, and then it's not. A smoke alarm goes off, and within minutes, the crew is in a desperate fight against an unbelievably rapid chain of failures. From that first smell of smoke to the final catastrophic impact, it was all over in just 19 minutes.
And that's the big question, isn't it? The one that's fueled investigations and, conspiracy theories for over 35 years. How could a fire on a modern, state-of-the-art aircraft get so bad, so incredibly fast?
To start unraveling this, we first need to understand the plane itself, because this wasn't just any 747, and its unique design is absolutely central to this whole crisis.
See, the Helderberg was a combi jet, part passenger plane, part cargo freighter. And this strange hybrid existed for a very specific political reason. Back then, because of apartheid, South Africa was facing all these sanctions. It forced their airline to fly these really long routes around Africa. The combi let them haul valuable cargo right alongside passengers, which made the flights profitable. But what it really meant was that you had a massive cargo hold sitting right behind the passenger cabin. A design born from political isolation that, it turns out, created a unique and ultimately fatal weakness.
So when that alarm finally went off, the fire wasn't tucked away in a cargo hold far below. No, it was right there, on the main deck. It was so intense it started melting through critical wiring, causing circuit breakers to pop and systems to just die. And as that thick, toxic smoke began pouring into the cabin, the crew made an unbelievably desperate call. Start an emergency descent so they could open the cabin doors in midair. A last-ditch Hail Mary attempt to get breathable air to the passengers.
Once the plane was lost, the mission changed. The hope of rescue faded, and the almost impossible task of recovery began. And the scale of the challenge was, well, it was almost beyond comprehension.
4,400 meters. Let that sink in. That's nearly 3 miles down. To put that in perspective, that is deeper than where the Titanic rests. Nobody had ever even tried a salvage operation at this depth before.
This kicked off something called Operation Resolve, a truly groundbreaking mission. First, they had to find the debris fields with sonar. Then they had to literally build a custom fiber optic cable long enough to reach the bottom. And then they had to send down a remote submarine to painstakingly search a wreckage field that stretched for miles, all for the slim hope of finding the plane's black boxes.
You know, this quote from the lead investigator, Rennie Van Zyl, really says it all. The pressure was immense. He knew the apartheid government could have just said, "It's too deep, too expensive, case closed." But the need to find out what happened to the pride of their fleet was just too great. They had to go on.
And a few things they did manage to bring up from that impossible depth, well, they started to paint a very, very disturbing picture.
Even the debris found floating on the surface gave them some chilling clues. They found a graphite tennis racket, which doesn't melt until over 600 degrees Celsius, and it was partially melted. They found an unused fire extinguisher, but it had cargo netting fused right onto its side. It suggests a crew member grabbed it, tried to get to the fire, but was just driven back by a wall of unimaginable heat. And, tragically, autopsies on the few victims recovered confirmed they had died from inhaling smoke long before the plane ever hit the water.
So you're probably wondering, how could the smoke even get into the cabin in the first place? Well, the combi was designed so the air pressure in the passenger area was higher, specifically to keep smoke out. The problem? Boeing's safety test used a smoldering bale of tobacco leaves. The fire on the Helderberg was a raging inferno. The heat was so intense it created its own pressure, completely overwhelming the safety design and forcing that toxic smoke right onto the passengers. And in a horrible twist of fate, the crew's attempts to vent the smoke probably just fed the fire more oxygen.
After an incredible amount of work, they found it, the cockpit voice recorder. But it was a huge frustration. The fire was so intense it had destroyed the wiring just 81 seconds after the alarm first sounded, so the tape didn't capture the final moments, but it did capture the first ones. And those seconds were just chaos, the sound of the alarm, and then pop after pop after pop, as dozens of circuit breakers fried in rapid succession. This wasn't a slow burn. This was something violent, explosive, and electrically destructive.
And that violent, unexplained nature of the fire led investigators down a much darker rabbit hole, one that led away from mechanical failure
and pointed directly at a political conspiracy. Now, to understand this theory, you have to remember the context of the time. South Africa was basically a pariah state because of its apartheid regime. It was under a strict international arms embargo and was fighting a nasty war in Angola. They were desperate for military supplies. And the national airline? Well, it was state-owned, and a lot of people saw it as just another arm of the government. The scientific evidence that came out was just wild. The fire started in one specific cargo pallet. Microscopic analysis found tiny iron particles that had been shot out at high velocity while they were molten. But here's the kicker. The plane's exterior skin got up to 300 degrees Celsius. With the constant rush of freezing air at altitude, that's nearly impossible, unless the fire was burning with something that brought its own oxygen.
So what on earth could do that? Investigators began looking at a chemical called ammonium perchlorate. Basically, it's the main ingredient in solid rocket fuel. It's an oxidizer, which means it doesn't need air to burn. It brings its own oxygen to the party. It's unstable, can be set off by simple vibration, and once it's going, a normal fire extinguisher won't do a thing. It fit the profile of the Helderberg fire perfectly.
An independent forensic scientist, Dr. David Klatzow, really hit the nail on the head. He said the evidence just didn't point to normal cargo, like plastics or cardboard. It pointed to something that had no business being on a passenger plane, something dangerous, illicit, and capable of creating what he called an accelerated fire.
So you have all of this evidence piling up, but it led to completely different official conclusions and a mystery that has haunted an entire nation for decades.
The official inquiries came to two starkly different results. The first one, the Margot Commission, happened under the apartheid government. It concluded the cause couldn't be determined and specifically ruled out any illicit cargo. But then, years later, after apartheid ended, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission took another look, and their conclusion was chilling. Whatever was on the official cargo list could not have caused that fire. They concluded there was something untoward on that flight.
Now, whatever the true cause, the Helderberg disaster had a huge impact on air safety. It exposed this fatal flaw in the combi design for everyone to see. In response, the FAA brought in much stricter rules for cargo holds. In fact, the new safety requirements were so expensive to implement that they made the 747 combi basically unprofitable, and the plane was pretty much phased out of existence.
But for the families of the victims, new regulations just aren't enough. This quote from Valerie Lautering, who lost both of her parents on that flight, really brings home the human cost that lingers to this day. For her and so many others, it's not just about a technical cause, it's about getting the truth. And that's where we're left. Over 35 years later, the official cause is still undetermined. The people who might actually know what was in that cargo hold have never spoken up. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the deepest and darkest secrets aren't at the bottom of the ocean, they're buried by people.